Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or afternoon, wherever you might be joining us from. I see there's already quite the lively chat going on. Thank you so much, Mr. Beckman. The context, historical evidence, outside evidence, historical situation. Okay, I see. Interesting. Well, anywho's, can everybody hear me? I've been having some mic difficulties with this computer, so just we'll do a quick mic test. Can we all be heard? Okay, wonderful. All righty. Well, today we're going to talk about the most world history thing that most world history classes talk about, which is the global world, when the world is finally won. Although, if you've been joining us on Fiveable, if you've been checking out other streams, if you've been learning, as I have, from the great Mr. Beckman, then you know that the global world actually is not that new and that we've been global for quite a long time. So I asked you guys to go ahead and take some guesses on the international corporations that I'm going to show some pictures of in this slide. And if there are any correct guesses, not necessarily the ones I'm going to mention, but the ones I'm actually going to show pictures of, then yeah, bragging rights for those who get it right. Congrats. Looks like, so we got some people feeling confident about the DBQ. That's awesome. Okay. Some other news. If you're just joining us for the first time, here's our traditional normal streaming calendar. Thursdays is our social studies days, but you know, as of right now, we're about 3 weeks out from the DBQ. So we may be doing, you know, we're pretty much, as I'm about to show you, we're pretty much doing stuff all this week. Mr. Beckman's going to be holding it down tomorrow in 2 different review streams, so do check those out. Those are going to be awesome. Then I'll actually be back on Thursday with, we're going to talk a little bit about units 1 and 2. So we're just going to go units 1 and 2 on Thursday. Awesome. So that's just the schedule for the next couple of days. And of course, as I can see some people already talking about, the Fiveable Olympics is officially in swing. On the slides that are attached to the stream, you can get the link to join the Fiveable, to create a team with the Fiveable Olympics friends. Oh, Mr. Beckman says he's going to be talking about the DBQ tomorrow. So if you still have DBQ questions after today, tomorrow might be great. And you can get Mr. Beckman. Camille says, I don't hear anything. That might be, yeah, that might be on your end. I don't know. Just do let me know, guys, if for some reason I cut out. It can be an issue. Awesome. But yeah, the Fiveable Olympics look awesome. There's already some teams that have racked up quite a few points. So if you think you can beat them, go for it. I say give it a shot, give it a try. So today we're just going to take a quick look at something called globalization. And we're going to quick talk a little bit about what that is, just so we're all on the same page, and then we'll talk about how we've seen globalization before the 20th century. So things that are normally associated with globalization, and we're going to talk about how they, you do see a lot of these trends before the 20th century, so that you can use them as context or possibly outside evidence, or even maybe complexity in your DBQ. Camille still having some issues with the mic. That's a good question. I think we try refreshing. As somebody suggested earlier, I think that's all I've got right now. Just keep trying, we'll see what happens. If not, you could always watch the replay. All right, so let's go ahead and really quick talk about some power vocabulary. These terms are going to come up in the slideshow. And what I wanted you guys to do is try and see if, before I give you the definitions of these words, What do you think these words mean? And you can feel free to throw these in chat. If you've seen these words, like in your textbook, in your notes, if you've seen them on other streams, like what do some of these words mean? Yeah, syncretism, that's the one we've been, syncretism is like the go-to AP World word. That's true. Cultures or religions, yeah, you could have syncretic religions. We see those a lot throughout the course. Some of these other words. Free trade market came with stockholders. Yeah, there's some connection between free trade and the stock market. Hegemony is kind of like rule or control. Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. Good way to put it. Gotcha. And internal migration can be found from rural to urban during the Industrial Revolution. That's a really good, not only is that like a great example, that's also putting it in its nice historical context. Yeah, so awesome possum. Yeah, so hegemony, as I think it was pointing out, that was someone, three dots, somebody whose name is three dots, was pointing out that hegemony is kind of like control, but it also is like, can be economic, or it could even be cultural domination. So there's cultural hegemony. It's a good SAT word. It's a good power vocab word to talk about. Instead of control or domination, if you want to make it sound complete, you can talk about hegemony. Can hegemony also be like the social structures within a region? The hierarchy hegemony? Yeah, I suppose. If it's total and complete, yeah, that could work. I think that's an interesting, Julian, I think that's an interesting application for it. And free trade, as some people talked about, is it came about with the rise of giant companies. And as Daisy pointed out, yeah, less government involvement in the economy. In other words, just basically meaning that governments don't do policies that would impact the movement of goods between places. It's a good way to put it, yeah. Free trade is actually, like, we normally associate it with the 20th century, but actually it's got a really long history. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Syncretism, as we've beaten this one to death, we know what this is, right? And internal migration, as Juliana said earlier, right, it happens within states, and it usually is a country to city movement. And it really happened a lot in Europe and the United States during the Industrial Revolution, parts of Japan during the Industrial Revolution, and actually to this, like right now today, it's happening a lot in China. Like the cities of China are exploding because people are moving in from the countryside. So internal migration. Just a little reminder that migration doesn't always mean cross borders. It can also mean within borders. Cool. All right. We'll get some power vocab. All right. A quick note before we begin, just because this is this topic of globalization. We have to kind of address the fact that globalization as an academic thing, like in a classroom, is one thing. But then if you go outside the classroom and you want to talk about globalization, you're going to quickly discover this is a very politicized term. And it has been in the United States for about 30 years now. There are a number of politicians who often talk about globalization, and they usually describe it in a negative way, like this is the cause of problems, social problems, economic problems. This is the cause of the decline of our country. It has a very negative connotation in the political sphere. So just kind of be aware of that. Like if you're researching something about globalization, or if you're talking to someone about globalization and suddenly they get very political on you, just keep in mind that that's just kind of where this word is in the zeitgeist and in our cultural discourse. It's become a negative word for some political figures to discuss social and economic problems. Webster's dictionary, just the dictionary, describes globalization as such. It is defined as the development of an increasingly integrated global economy marked by free trade, the flow of money, and the tapping of cheaper foreign labor markets. And we're going to talk about all of those things. But that is the gist of economic globalization, right? It is the integration of markets and the flow of currency across borders. But it also includes a cultural element, such as a level of syncretism and expansion of culture, which we're also going to discuss. And just be aware that if you Google or you research globalization, you may run into things on the internet that sometimes border on the conspiracy theory side, in terms of like what caused globalization and what impacts globalization. Just keep in mind that globalization touches all of us. Like, it affects all of us, whether we know it or not, and whether we'd like it to or not, but it does. And it just affects all of us differently. Like, it affects everybody around the world, but it affects everyone around the world very differently. And the other thing I like to always point out about globalization is not inevitable. It wasn't. Sometimes when we talk about history, we talk about it as a process with an end. Like, this was the end point of history, that we would all be united and connected. But there have been a number of times in history where the globalizing process has stopped or reversed in a few cases. So globalization is not an inevitable thing, but it is the trend right now, but it's not inevitable. It may not continue forever. So King Dan is modernizing the globe as a whole. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So it's applying, it is applying an economic system to the entire globe, is a good way to phrase it. That would be kind of some free market stuff we're going to talk about a little bit. Yeah, some thrive, some fall. Globalization is not, it is, you know, it has positive consequences and negative consequences for everybody involved. So it's one thing to always keep in mind about it when we have discussions about it. Okay, enough with the boring talking part. I want you guys to take a look at this map, and brownie points to anybody who can tell me what this map is depicting. But go ahead and take your best guess, because we're going to start off by talking about the maps. We're going to see a couple maps. So this is a map of the world, and it's got some colors on it, but what do these colors represent? Let's take some guesses. Maybe we can figure out based on what's on the map and what's being shown on the map. We got industrialization, maybe. Who's in charge? Christianity and Islam, maybe it's a religions map. A level of nation developments, colonization map, type of governments. There's a lot of gray here. I think someone got it. Yeah, somebody got it. I think Julia got it, right? It's the 7 Years' War map, right? Oh, it was on another stream. Okay, well, it was on another stream then. Democracy, yeah, is it a kind of government thing? But yeah, it was on another stream. But yeah, this is a map of the 7 Years' War. Or maybe it was in your class. Either way, yeah. No, this is a map of the 7 Years' War. And it was a war that, you know, get this, lasted 7 years in some places and lasted longer in others. But if you've taken AP Euro or you're familiar with European history, then it's usually described as a war between like Austria and Prussia, and then all these other European powers got pulled into it. But the thing about the 7 Years' War is if you look at this map, and the blue that you see here is the Prussian / Great British side, and then the green is the French, Austrian, Spanish, Russian side, right? And if you look at the map, yeah, there's a lot in Europe, but then you look at the rest of the map, and look at where all this territory is, right? Yeah, okay, so Dan is pointing out something that's called the French and Indian War. In American history, we do tend to call it the French and Indian War, because that's, you know, it was American colonists on one side and British and French and mostly Native Americans on the other side. So that's why in America we call it the French and Indian War. And it has, and that's my point I'd like to point out, is that this could be considered an example of a world war, because it was fought all over the world. In India, It's referred to as the Third Carnatic War because it was the third war that involved some of the princely states of the Carnatic region, which is like the southern part of India, what is like Tamil Nadu today. It involved a lot of those kings and the British and the French fighting each other. So they call it the Carnatic War in India. But my point is that this arguably was a world war. It was fought in the Americas. It was fought in Europe. This picture on the right here is a French fort in West Africa being attacked by the British. And down here is the French fortress at Pondicherry in India after it was destroyed by the British. So it is interesting to think about how far back global trends like warfare, global war, really do stretch. This course describes, I think it's unit 7 is the global conflict unit, right? But, you know, we could really go back 400 years and we could find global conflict. Cool. So I'm going to kick it started off with that really kind of cool thing I always like to talk about with my students. So I'd also like to, we're gonna do a couple rounds of images and what units they're associated with. Some of you might have seen the image on the left here, but what about the image on the right? Does anyone know what these are and kind of what these images are associated with? Mr. Beckman might know the image on the right is, the image on the left is. What we got? The one on the right looks like a jihad, an example of syncretism. The one on the right, Islam, yeah, the Delhi Sultanate, maybe. First one is Egyptian. Interesting. Nelson, why do you say Egyptian? I haven't heard that one before. What makes you think Egyptian? Srivijaya, yeah. Hinduism and Buddhism. Looks Buddhist. Yeah, well, you're definitely in the right. You're in the right region, right? So this is actually the one on the left is a statue of a Mapajahit ruler, which came post Srivijaya, the third Mapajahit king, who I am not. I'm not gonna. The name is. I would not pronounce it very well. I would completely destroy it. It's a very long name. But yeah, this is the depiction of a Mapajahit queen. But she also has elements of a Hindu deity, and the Mapajahit were also known for their incorporation of Buddhism into some of their practices. So this is a great example of syncretism, right? And the one on the left, or the one on the right, sorry, the one on the right, people are pointing out about Islam. Yes, you're correct. This does have to do with Islam. The one on the right has to do with Islam. Does anyone know what this picture is depicting, though? Someone said jihad. Not a bad guess. Does anyone know what it might also be depicting? Something to do with the Shia-Sunni divide? Maybe it's the Mughals. This is actually a depiction of a pilgrimage caravan. This is a depiction of a Hajj caravan, right? Yeah, Hajj, you guys got it. So this is a Hajj caravan going on its way to Mecca, right? And so it's a very big thing. There's actually a lot of paintings of Hajj caravans. It was a big theme in like European art in the 1800s to depict Hajj caravans, but it's kind of tricky to find a Persian drawing of them. There aren't a lot of them out there, but trying to get some authentic painting in there. Anyways, the reason I bring both of these up is because both of these represent sort of cultural globalization. And you have two different ways that it happens. On the left, you have syncretism, which is when cultures expand and they blend with other places. But on the right, you have the Hajj, which is an example of a culture expanding and not necessarily blending, what it did in some places, but really just about expanding. I think how many years ago was this? 4 or 5 years ago, there was a similar, there was a question on the AP exam um, yeah, Mansa Musa, a great example of the Hajj, right? There was a question on the AP exam. It showed a similar picture to this. It was a ship, and it asked why it was that the Hajj, like what would the ship be doing that would be creating a cultural zone. And they said that the Hajj, the answer to that question that you had to basically understand was the Hajj creates a cultural world because it creates a common experience, right? Since all Muslims are required to do the Hajj at least once in their lifetime, it becomes a common experience that all Muslims can relate to. It helps unite this cultural zone behind a common tradition. And so these are kind of two ways to think about cultural expansion, right? Is that it's both syncretic, but it's also just a straight up expansion of cultural zones. And especially in units 1 and 2, we have 3 really big expanding cultural zones in the world. We have the Islamic cultural zone, we have the Chinese cultural zone, and we have what I'm going to call right now the Indic cultural zone in Southeast Asia. And so the expansion of these cultural zones can be related to the current expansion of global culture in the modern world, right? And so I didn't see any guesses for McDonald's. I would have thought that would have been a really good one. But yeah, great contextualization. Yeah, and I think so. And so today in the world, there's a lot of, I was talking about how we're afraid, like some politicians in the United States are afraid of globalization. Outside of the United States, there's a lot of concern about the globalization, or what they call Americanization, right? The idea that American culture and American values are taking over the world. Maybe none better than the fact that McDonald's can now be found almost anywhere, like this McDonald's in China, right? American TV shows, American fast food, American movies seem to just kind of be blatantly dumping on the landscape. Yeah. And so if you need to talk about the expansion, like if you were to get a DBQ prompt about cultural expansion, you could relate it to the current expansion of American culture. And the question of whether that Americanization, that widespread American culture, may be related to American political hegemony. There's actually a great article, if you have the time. I know we're all really busy. It's called McWorld, and it discusses how American political hegemony is connected to American cultural hegemony. But is that necessarily true that American culture is the dominant medium of the world culture today? I don't know. You could probably think of something not from the United States that's popular all around the world. Very AP Human Geo. Yeah, no, there's definitely some of this. There's definitely, this has an element of Human Geo to it. That's correct. Sinicization, yeah, the spread of Chinese cultural values, right? That's it's interesting. That term is usually applied to like medieval China and the nomads, but you could actually there's a case that you could apply that. I mean, you've got nations in East Africa where people are like learning Mandarin Chinese at a really incredible rate. So there's the spread of K-pop. Well, that's actually one of the ones I honestly think probably the greatest sort of counterexample of American cultural dominance has got to be, it's got to be soccer. Like it's the thing that it's not an American thing, and it's so universally popular. I don't think American football, even if you tried, could ever displace soccer at all. Yeah, but K-pop is a good one. Bollywood movies, really good. And I know that if there's anybody from India in the audience, I'm sure you can clarify that, Bollywood is only half of Indian cinema, and there's also all the regional dialects. Yeah, some good chat about the exam and the thing. K-dramas, yes. Oh, those are so sad. Those are so sad. Yeah, no, Bollywood movies are pretty popular. There's some really good ones out there, and they're starting to make their way into American cinema, as well as, again, the movie from Korea, Parasite, that won all those awards. Right, that's another great example of a movie from outside of the United States really making an impact. Awesome. So, something to think about, right? The expansion of culture continues around the globe to this day, right? But something to think about might be the difference in how it happened back in, say, Unit 1 versus how it happens today, right? How is the spread of culture different from Unit 1 than it was today? That would be something to think about. And I'm sure you could point out a few things. As Nelson's pointing out, the internet is a big, the internet is a huge part of this now, right? Migration as well. Migration versus trade. Yeah, there's a lot more people moving around today. That's true, Duluth. There's a lot of physically, like, humans moving around today than there was back then, right? Thanks in part to technologies like planes and ships and trains. I mean, compared to Unit 1, we have tons of people moving around today. Didn't study globalization. That's okay. We're just talking about how you can use globalization in context. A school had a Bollywood-themed homecoming. Now that's interesting. Huh. Pop culture, right? Pop culture, yeah, in all the forms that it takes. Migration is a continuity. Yeah, no, that's true. Migration, actually, if you can read AP World History as having migration in literally there's migration in every single unit. It's something I do with my own students. We talk about how there's migration in every unit in the course. But anyways, okay, cools. I mean, the thing is, they wrote some of it out of the course when they redesigned it, but you can talk about it throughout almost every single unit. Awesome. All right, let's go to round 2. So that was kind of talking about like cultural globalization, and let's talk a little bit more about economic globalization. So here are 2 more pictures, and even if you're not entirely sure what these are, go ahead and take your best guess in what unit they might be associated with. 5, 6, 1800s. I'll give you a clue. The one on the left is not a pub, although it does. I can see why we might think it looks like a pub, but it's not a pub. Rin is correct. That's actually an English coffee house on the left and a tea house, right? On the right, does anyone know what the scene on the right might be from? I think you guys in general, you got Unit 5, 6. That's correct. You got that one. It's got naval ships, yeah. Great Britain, yeah. Oh, Opium Wars. Yeah. No, this is on the painting on the right is a painting from the Opium Wars. It is the British invasion of not Hong Kong, one of the port cities they bombarded during the war. I can't remember which one it was, but these are British soldiers, and they're heading towards the shore to occupy this city. Row your boat. Yeah, no, that's true. And on the left, it is a British coffee house, right? Or a British tea house, and people are getting together and they're chatting, just like we kind of do in coffee houses today, right? Now, my question is could anybody sort of explain how these 2 images are actually connected to one another? Because they do have a connection. There is a connection. Anyone kind of point out how these 2 are connected to one another? Trade, the magic word. Yeah, trade is a big one. Well, you're right. That's true. Coffee houses are where people got together to discuss their business. That is also true. The drug trade, yeah, opium. And, I mean, caffeine is also a drug, so, like, coffee and tea also drugs. Some cultural exchange, that's true, right? Coffee became a big thing in Europe in the 1800s when they started importing it in large numbers. How can you tell that it's associated with the Opium Wars? In this case, because I looked up pictures of the Opium Wars, and this was a good one, right? Plus, it kind of gives the impression of the strength of the military aspect of it all. But this is why I like these two pictures, right? It's kind of the cultural side of this, right? Look, we're in coffee houses and we're talking about, business and philosophy and how cool we are. But on the other side of this, you've got the military force that requires to have trade and free trade. So in units 4 and 5, although unit 5 doesn't really talk much about it, but also into unit 6, we see an increase in world trade, right? We see just an explosion in global trade, right? And for the first time, we do see almost all of the world, at least on the coasts, are all united, right? Yeah, no, that's correct. 1841 to 1843, those are the Opium Wars, yeah. Anyway, so we see the world united, right? But the question is, especially when thinking about the 1800s and 1700s, was this all of this unity on equal footing, right? Did everybody have an equal say in how the world was going to be run, or what goods were going to be traded somewhere? So that's the thing to think about, right? And free trade was kind of like the watchword. It started sort of in Great Britain, and then it spread to other countries. And so free trade was a big driver of all this kind of economic unity, right? But there's another side to that. Like there's the other side of the coin, right? Yeah, as Daisy's pointing out, a lot of it was imperialism. That's actually the reason. That was it's literally written down. You can go find it as the justification for the Opium Wars was the Chinese won't trade with us. We need to open them up to free trade, right? And so it's really important to keep in mind there's a connection, right? Free trade sounds great. We talk about economic unity, right? We talk about, being able to buy and sell things to whoever you want, wherever you want. But you have to understand that a lot of that came in with imperialism and with military force and with violence. Like it was the same thing with I don't think we've talked about this at all, but the French intervention in Mexico. So France occupied Mexico for like 10 years in the 1860s. And literally the French emperor said, yeah, we need free trade. Like we need Mexico to trade with us. So we're going to occupy them so they'll free trade with us. Exactly, right? When the emperor banned opium, right? What do you mean I can't sell my highly addictive drug here? What's wrong with you? Right? So it's important to keep in mind that free trade sounds great and it has a lot of benefits economically, but it's also important to keep in mind that the origins and the beginnings of a lot of this was hand in hand with military violence, right? Hand in hand with political domination. So how free is free trade? Well, I don't know. Good question. And that's what you can keep in mind, right? If you want to talk about, if you have a prompt that might have to do with imperialism, or a prompt that has to do with new economic ideas with the Industrial Revolution, right? Then you can talk about free trade today. We're going to talk more about that in 1 second. The other thing would be the international businesses. And we kind of touched on this a little bit already, like McDonald's, big international business. Apple, big international business, right? And these are just the two I have here are examples that are in your textbooks and or in the course description that are from this time period. But you can continue those by talking about the big corporations of today. So real quick, continuity, say no to drugs. That's funny. You guys are a little too young for that, but nah, that was my school experience. It was just say no to drugs. That's all they ever talked about. Yeah, fruit companies are going to get you for not paying your debts. Transnational corporations, yeah. I want to quick show you this map of the world today. These are all of the existing free trade agreements in the world today, and where the colors are shaded, they actually overlap with other free trade agreements. But if you take a look at this map of all the major free trade agreements, what do you notice about all of them? What kind of sticks out? They're regional, yeah. Usually they do these agreements with countries they're physically close to. Yeah, they tend to be they're kind of connected geographically, right? They tend to be, the closer a country is, the more likely they are to have a free trade agreement. And of course, this raises a really big question for me, quite frankly. Like, if we're talking about a global world, this doesn't look like a global world. This looks like a world that's like broken into pieces, like chunks. Like, here's the former Soviet Union, here's Europe, here's South Africa, here's South Asia, here's like East Asia, here's Southeast Asia. Like, it literally doesn't even look global to me. It looks like regionalized kind of chunks, pieces. So something to keep in mind. It's not, we don't have like a world free trade thing. Imperialism, yeah, some of these borders and some of these connections do seem to reflect imperialism, like Australia's special agreements with Great Britain and the EU kind of reflect some imperial legacies. So something to keep in mind, like if you get a prompt about free trade in the Industrial Revolution, you can carry that forward to talking about free trade today. And now I want to show you perhaps the coolest graphic, the most amazing graphic. If you've never seen it, it's one of my favorites of all time. What is the most profitable country or profitable company in the history of companies? Does anyone know the answer to that question? Most profitable company in the history of companies. And that's why I like this graphic so much. It is indeed the East India Company. If you haven't seen this graphic, to kind of give you an idea, on the left side is the East India Company, its most profitable year. And on the right side are the top 20 modern companies, right? Put them all together, and they, only when you put them all together do they equal the East India Company. This is why it's one of my favorite graphics of all time. It's just amazing to kind of give you like a sense of just how profitable that company was, just how much money it made. Yeah, adjusted for inflation. Yeah, that's my understanding. So again, if you get a DBQ about international companies or new ideas in the Industrial Revolution, or something about international trade in units 3 or 4, you want to talk about the East India Company, you can contextualize it by talking about current international companies such as Alibaba or Facebook or Apple, or any of these companies that have huge numbers of offices in other parts of the world. Yeah, Starbucks, yeah, you're right. That's a good question. Maybe they just didn't make the cut that year. Although I think, you know what, you point out something very interesting, Tanya, which is if you think about what did the East India Company trade, they mostly traded like luxury spices and stuff, like tea and coffee and sugar, right? I don't see, there are almost no strictly food supplying things on here, right? There's Walmart and there's McDonald's, but then the rest of these are like technology or resource extraction, like Chevron, or banking. So that's an interesting kind of comparison. Yeah, Starbucks is, it's got a long way to go. They do have it in China, but it's very expensive. About to start an opium company. Well, you may not do so well with that. I think it might be illegal. So maybe do your homework on the laws there. Anywho, so that's, again, just very cool. Again, if you get a DBQ about international trade and it's unit 3 or 4, carry it forward, talk about modern international businesses. Okay, practice time. So here is a hypothetical prompt. Here's a hypothetical prompt. And what I want you to do is take a look at it and think about how any of the stuff we've talked about could be used to help contextualize this prompt. going forward, like contextualize into the future. So think about the big themes at play in this particular prompt. There's some trade and culture, right? That's true. The networks of exchange, aka trade, affecting cultural traditions or belief systems. So what have we discussed so far that could potentially have an impact on there? Colonization. Yeah, that's a big one, Daisy. Like colonization could be a forward example of how trade affected culture. You could discuss the influence of Europe and other parts of the world, which began via trade. Silk Road and the spread of Buddhism. Yeah, that could be part of that particular prompt, but maybe talking about it in a slightly broader sense, Camille. The globalization of culture and religion, right? Syncretism. You could connect, perhaps, you could make the connection between Islam spreading into Africa through the trans-Saharan trade and then Christianity spreading to Africa through economic colonization. Yeah. The Sepoy Rebellion, that would be an interesting one. That would be good because there was a lot of cultural things at play during that revolt. That could be a pretty big one, yeah. The question about the bullets being laced in grease. Yeah, the voyages to India, which really picked up after 1450, so you could again kind of extend that forward, right? World War II and the rise of Japan and the East Asia Pacific economy. Well, they call it the Pacific Rim economy. So it was like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore and Hong Kong. The economic dominance of those countries. And then, give or take 30 years later, you get China. But yeah, World War II and the westernization of East Asia. That's interesting. No, these are all great. These are awesome. The Crusades, that might fall in within the time frame of this topic. But potentially, yeah, you could talk about that's a little more on the culture side than the trade side. You could talk about it in reverse, how networks of exchange in part might have prompted the Crusades. The Columbian Exchange, that would be a good one, right? So again, we're thinking about contextualizing forward, right, in time. So good stuff. These are all wonderful things that could work. Because remember, with context, you need to set the stage for this argument, right? You need to talk about how, not specifically what you're going to argue, which will be attached to the hypothetical documents, but talking about this process of a trade affecting culture in a very broad sense of the word. The splitting of the Roman Catholic Church and the later Protestant Reformation. Possibly. I don't know if that's necessarily connected so much with trade, though. So something to keep in mind. Got to connect the trade with the culture. Cool. All right. So, last time. These images and what are they associated with? Which units do we find these images in? Unit 6, yeah. Yeah, a lot of Unit 6. These are pretty much all Unit 6 images. Chinese Exclusion Act. Yeah, that picture on the left is pretty much the Chinese Exclusion Act in a nutshell. Yeah, there's some elements of the white man's burden in there, yeah. Industrialization. Yeah, no, that's true. Migration, yeah. Notice that there is a ship down here. This ship is actually, this bottom left one, or this bottom right one is, these are Italians disembarking in Argentina in the 1890s. This is the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was passed in very, very tail end of Unit 6. Forced migration. The Indian National Congress, seasonal labor. Yeah, that's kind of, so Andrew and Lucia both kind of have it a little bit. This top right one is actually a family of Indians in Trinidad, in the west, in the south, the southern Caribbean, right? And they were brought over. They were encouraged by the British to move there to do labor, with the promise of pay for their work, which is a really big part of Unit 6, which is movement within empires. And do we call it forced? Maybe not, but coerced might be a good word. Semi-coerced, yeah, right. It's is anyone forcing you to get on this boat? No. Do you have a lot of opportunities where you currently live? Not really. So maybe this would be a good idea. Yeah, indentured servitude is the word we tend to use. Right, indentured servitude. It's a good way to phrase it. And this example that I'm showing you here in particular is from the Caribbean. These are people from South Asia going to the Caribbean, but you have people in South Asia going to East Africa. You had people in China going into Southeast Asia. And so we kind of talk about this like it's migration within the empire. And so in units 4, 5, and 6, there was a lot of human movements, right? And so any of those prompts could potentially include discussing human migration, right? In the Columbian Exchange, something of note is that most people did not move of their own free will. I'm talking about the slave trade, of course. Most of the people that came to the Americas were not Europeans. They were slaves. Like the ratio of Europeans to slaves is so incredibly high over the course of 300 years. It's something like 80-20. But migration is always a part of the story, whether it's forced, semi-forced, or totally free and of people's own free will. We do have the story in America of the melting pot and the Statue of Liberty, and there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people came to America from Europe because they wanted a better life. But then there's also the stories about, Chinese laborers being, coerced into going to work in South America. So it's always a mix, right, when we talk about immigration, as well as the backlash against immigrants. Probably have noticed in the United States there's been a lot more talk within the media and the political discourse about limiting immigration, various means by which people propose doing that. But this talk about limiting immigration and sometimes targeting immigration bans is in part not new at all. It's a long history of backlash against the fear of immigrants. So, Tanya, yeah, well, yeah, no. So Tanya's asking a question about rebellion in Haiti. Yeah, guns and weapons. Powerless. It's a good. Powerless is an interesting phrase. A lot of things. Being in a new world and a new land that you're not really familiar with can be a bit scary. Revolution takes many forms. I always point to the maroon societies, right? Slaves may not have revolted against their masters, but they ran away in really high numbers. Also, the brutality of the system sometimes means you only live like 3 years, not really enough time to organize a revolt. Anyways, so if you were to get some sort of DBQ that talks about the Industrial Revolution or something about global migration, you could definitely make a point that in the 20th century, you see a lot of migration as well. From the 1950s onwards, we do see a lot of migration around the world. And even if you just want to talk about the United States in particular, how would you say immigration to the United States is different today from, say, 100 years ago at the end of in the beginning of the 20th century? Like, think about the stories you see with the Statue of Liberty. How's immigration different today than it was, say, 100 years ago or 150 years ago? Could be something to point out. Could be a good fodder for complexity or contextualization. And like immigration is easier now than it's ever been, in the sense that physically getting to your location is now easier than it's ever been. But what is different about immigrating today than it was 150 years ago? Yeah, that's true. So Tanya's pointing out that we go from high population to high population, right? There's in the United States, at least, there's not a lot. There's not really any more urban. There's no more rural urban migration. It's just city to city usually, or city to suburb. Sometimes there's city to suburb migration, but and occasionally you get people moving out of big cities. That's true. One of the things that's really different about immigration today versus immigration back in, say, 1850 is that while it's physically easier to get wherever you're going, hop on a plane, hop on a boat, you'll be there in either a day or a week. Now the controls at the borders are very strict and high tech, and it's trickier now to, so to speak, just come to a country than it used to be. And especially if you want to relocate permanently to a new country, the paperwork can just be an absolute nightmare. If anyone's ever had to go through that, if any of your parents have had to go through that, or you yourself have had to go through that, I'm sure you can attest that, you know, the difficulties with which it can be to make that transition. Yeah, it takes a long time, right? So maybe it's physically easier to get wherever you're going, but you know, once you're there, actually like establishing yourself can be very hard. And this actually brings up something really interesting that I think is one of the more interesting aspects of globalization when we're talking about immigration, which is the difference and or the connection between immigration and outsourcing, right? Now, you guys have probably heard of outsourcing, right? The movement of production and services to places with lower costs. This is a big part of globalization, is the outsourcing of production from, say, the United States to somewhere where it's cheaper to do, right? And the connection, though, between immigration in the old days and outsourcing today, right? There's an interesting kind of connection there. People will probably move there to get cheaper things, maybe. So when we think about immigration today in the United States, or really anywhere, what do people who immigrate tend to do? Right. Oh, so sorry, Andrew's pointing out here. Imperialism pointed out how they exploited laborers to make profits. Yeah, so physical labor, when you can have it cheaply, tends to be a good thing. People like cheap physical labor. Businesses like cheap physical labor. And at least in the United States and some other parts of Europe, large influxes of immigrants tended to provide the cheap source of physical labor, right, to do jobs that needed to be done, but to be able to do them at a low cost. But today, you don't have to necessarily bring immigrants to do those jobs in one place. You can take the jobs to them, and that's what outsourcing is in a way, right? Thanks to changes in technology, you don't need a cheap source of labor, right? But you could potentially just send the jobs over there, right? You don't need need several million migrants to come to your country. Just take the job and send it to where the migrants are from. Rin's pointing out we outsourced to China, and now China's outsourced. Right, China's now starting to outsource some of their jobs to Africa. Yeah, China's undergoing an interesting economic times right now. Anyways, here's some data, a little chart. This is actually something that the College Board themselves put together about migration in units 5 and 6. And it kind of gives you an idea, a little snapshot of where a lot of the major migration was taking place. So if you want to take a look at that. What always kind of surprises me is that there were such such an insane amount of migration to Russian Asia and northern China. Like I never knew that until I looked at this particular chart. It's kind of the sheer scale of people moving and where a lot of people went. Anyway, something to think about. I always like looking at. I show this to my students. We talk a little bit about what these tables mean, right, and where immigration was happening. Because in the United States, we tend to sometimes fall into that story about immigrants from Europe to the Americas, and that's the age of immigration. But arguably, there was that was a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of other movements around the world. So, global history, cool. Alrighty, we'll do one more practice prompt, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it on up since we're running up against an hour right here. So here's another hypothetical prompt. Let's say you get a prompt that asks you to evaluate the extent to which immigration affected cultural and economic networks between 1750 and 1900. As Mr. Beckman's pointing out, we tend to only talk about immigrants who came to the U.S., who left Europe, coming to the U.S., whereas European immigrants went to a lot of different places too. Yeah, interactions with the environment, right? That's true. The Congo, yeah. Not a ton of Belgian immigration to the Congo. Like laborers, but not a lot of like Belgians themselves getting ready to move to the Congo. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked by a global migration DBQ. I don't think there's ever been one actually. Has there been a global migration DBQ? It's been an LEQ once, I think, but I don't know if it's ever been a DBQ. Right. Yeah. So people from South Asia to Guyana, right? People from Italy going to Argentina, Chile, Canada. Yeah. No, we definitely tend to talk about just America, but there was a lot of stuff going on in a lot of places. It does cover several units. That's true. And British administrators moving to India, the French to Algeria. That's a good one. The colons. Algeria is actually like, we could do a whole stream just on Algeria. Their situation was so interesting. Their situation was very interesting in terms of being a colony, but also being, the French viewed Algeria as part of France, not as like a colony somewhere else. They thought it was like part of France. Nationalistic rebellion within the trade networks. Yeah, you could talk about the creation of new states within these networks, right? That then led to immigration. Yep, British to Canada. Yep. Actually, funny thing, Julian, I just read this the other day. Apparently, the Canadians who served in World War I in France on the Western Front, apparently almost all of them had been born in Britain, migrated to Canada, and then when Canada joined World War I, they joined the Canadian Army and went back to fight in France. So there was that's just how much British immigration to Canada there was at the time. Dan, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Migration definitely happened. Like I said, take a look at that. That chart will be in the stream slides if you want to take a look at it. But yeah, should you get some kind of prompt about migration, you can always talk about migration today, post 1950s. The technology of migration has changed, right? Planes and trains. The difference in border controls versus the physical difficulty of getting to where you're going. So those could all be things that you could stretch outwards. Yeah, you could also take it backwards potentially. Talking about how compass is made. You could also take it backwards. Tanya's kind of hinting at this. Unit 2, I believe, talks about diasporic communities, mostly in the Indian Ocean, but also in some of the parts of the world. And to a certain extent, although a little bit different, right? You could compare those with the ethnic enclaves that grow up with a lot of migrant communities across the world. So that's more of a period 6 thing. You could do a little connection period, unit 2, unit 6 kind of thing. Cool. All right, well, that is just some dope stuff. I'll answer. I see there's a few questions that weren't related to just like guesses with which pictures I was going to show. So let me just take a minute and I'll answer those questions. But yeah, I'll leave you with the power vocab. I'll leave you with that. And if you didn't ask a question or you didn't need, oh, I see Mr. Beckman got one for me. Yeah, okay, never mind, Mr. Beckman. Thank you very much for taking care of those. Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, thank you all for coming. And don't forget to check out the cram contest part 2. We're doing a very similar, Mr. Beckman is leading a very similar cram contest as to last week. We're looking for practicing being concise. And so go ahead and check that out. That's the call to action button down there. But yeah, thanks so much for showing up. I hope everyone continues to stay well and healthy and keep on studying, and I'll see all of you guys on Thursday. See y'all on Thursday.